Hello everyone, and welcome to the 29th episode of Analyzing Evil, featuring one of the most iconic villains of all time, Darth Vader from Star Wars. Darth Vader's presence within pop culture is legendary, and the story of his downfall from a heroic and selfless man to a brutal and ruthless monster is a tragic tale of manipulation that has us finding sympathy for a man who's endured so much, yet destroyed and defiled so much more. In this video, I'll be focusing on Vader as he appears in the current Star Wars canon, with the exception of the Revenge of the Sith novelization. The sources I'll be pulling from in this video include episodes 1 through 6, the Clone Wars TV series, Rebels, the Darth Vader comics, of which there are 3 iterations, Age of Republic, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Obi-Wan and Anakin, and Thrawn alliances. If you haven't read any of the comics I've listed in this video or the previous ones on Dooku and Maul, I highly suggest you give them a read, as they're full of great information on all of these characters. And if you haven't read any of the books either, I suggest those as well. Or if you don't have the time, you can always find an audiobook version of any of these titles using our sponsor for today's video, Audible. I use Audible quite a bit when making these videos, as there's quite a lot of research I have to do on these characters, and being able to listen to a number of these books anytime is incredibly helpful. You can find an audiobook version of nearly any Star Wars novel, canon or legends, that you can listen to on any device, wherever you're at. It's hard to recommend just one Star Wars novel, but if you haven't listened to the canon Dooku Jedi Lost, or the Legends Darth Plagueis novel, I highly recommend you pick up both of those. But of course, it's not only Star Wars that you can listen to. As with an Audible Plus membership, you can get instant access to the hundreds of titles they have available in the Audible Plus catalog. And with a Premium Plus membership, you get all the perks of the Audible Plus membership, as well as a free credit each month that you can use to purchase any title in their expansive library. You can check all of this out and more by going to audible.com/Vile, or by texting Vile to 500-500 to start a free 30-day trial good towards any of their membership plans. Again, that's audible.com/VILE, or text Vile to 500-500 to start listening to your favorite titles today. Thank you, Audible, for sponsoring this video. Now, without further ado, let's begin. Now, normally, the first thing I'd talk about is a character's background. However, I'm sure nearly all of you watching this video have seen the films, and considering the prequels delve heavily into Anakin's background, I'm first going to highlight the important relationships Anakin cultivated over his lifetime, and then I'll move on to talk about Anakin's traits, and the events that shaped Anakin into who he became, and then I'll tie those into how his personality, beliefs, and motivations developed alongside them. Let's begin by talking about his mother. Anakin's mother was the only person close to Anakin in his youth, and Shmi Skywalker was a kind and caring person who elevated Anakin's already compassionate nature, showing Anakin the value of sentient life and the depravity of slavery and murder. Though it's not exactly uncommon for a child to be attached to their mother, Anakin's bond with his mother was intense, and she had a lasting impression on not only his memory, but his views of the galaxy and his handling of his emotions. Anakin had always envisioned that alongside his own freedom would come his mother's, and the fact that it hadn't greatly disturbed him. After his mother's death, this translated into guilt, and the death of his mother and his inability to prevent it weighed heavily on Anakin's conscience. These two events were quite instrumental in Anakin's development, but because I've mentioned them here, the only component of them I'll be mentioning in the next section is his massacre of the Tusken encampment. Next on our list is Obi-Wan Kenobi. Anakin and Obi-Wan's relationship would start out rocky, but over time, Obi-Wan would grow to become perhaps the most influential person in his young life. Their relationship was one of love and respect, and just as Obi-Wan considered Anakin a brother, Anakin also felt the same way. Obi-Wan wasn't as free-willed as his master Qui-Gon, but he still had some of his master in him, and this would lead to some of the leeway and understanding he showed his Padawan when he acted out, and when he questioned the practices of the Jedi Order or the system of the Republic. Obi-Wan would be his near-constant companion during his time in the Jedi Order, and his teachings and presence in Anakin's life had a profound effect on his development up until his rebirth as Darth Vader. Now, I said Obi-Wan was perhaps the most influential person in Anakin's young life, only because there's another person he has to contend with for that spot, and that's Padmé Amidala. Initially infatuated with her with a childlike innocence, the fond memory of Padmé, as likely the most beautiful girl he had seen up to that point in his life, and the time he spent with her, was only magnified as time progressed, and by the time he'd laid eyes on her 10 years after their parting, Anakin's memories surely enhanced the overwhelming flow of affection he felt upon seeing Padmé once again. This would, of course, evolve into love, and the very reason for his fall to the dark side and transformation into Darth Vader. Though Padmé had a positive impact on Anakin in providing him with a loving relationship, her presence in his life altered not only Anakin's fate, but the fate of the entire galaxy. You'll notice that when discussing the previous two relationships, I noted that they were the most influential people of Anakin's young life. Well, this person is without a doubt the most influential person in Anakin's life overall, and that's Palpatine. Interested in Anakin from their first meeting on Naboo, Palpatine would watch Anakin grow throughout his time as a Jedi, and would frequently check on the boy's progress as he aged, mentoring him and taking him into his personal service whenever the situation allowed. Keenly aware of Anakin's attunement to the Force, Palpatine saw within Anakin the final piece that would be instrumental in ensuring the success of the Sith Grand Plan. And to cultivate Anakin into his future apprentice, he would form a bond with Anakin akin to that of a father figure, and would serve as Anakin's confidant and friend during his time as a Jedi, and, to an extent, after his fall to the dark side. I'd like to note that Palpatine may have indeed been Anakin's father in a sense, as we get this panel in the Darth Vader comics, where Vader is experiencing a vision in which he sees Palpatine using the Force to influence Shmi Skywalker's pregnancy, an act which he likely had help in performing from his own master, Darth Plagueis. Anakin described Palpatine in the Revenge of the Sith novelization as one of the men he loved more than anything in the universe, alongside his master. This relationship, that was in large part artificially created by Palpatine, brought a lot of conflict into Anakin, and after his rise to Sith Lord, his relationship with his master would be one of hatred, but also one that would be his only source of minuscule compassion and friendship during these lonely years. The last person I want to talk about is Ahsoka. Not quite as influential as the previous entries, Ahsoka would still have her role as an anchor for Anakin's own personality, and as a companion whom he could depend upon that shared some of the same attitudes as he. Ahsoka was obviously a big part of his life during the Clone Wars, but her role in shaping Anakin's life is, as I said, quite small compared to the others that I have listed. However, I will be mentioning a crucial event that impacted Anakin that involves Ahsoka later on in this video. Now that we've gone over the most important people that shaped his life, let's move on to his traits and the events that shaped his personality, beliefs, and motivations. Anakin was an energetic, compassionate, and curious child, gifted with the Force, and mechanically inclined. Anakin was a natural with all manner of electronics, and he had a keen mind that was well suited to fixing problems and thinking outside of the box to adapt to situations. Anakin's compassion would lead him to desiring to bring an end to slavery for not only himself and his mother, but to everyone in the galaxy, and his curiosity and dream of leaving the bleak deserts of Tatooine also gave him a desire to be the first being to visit every planet in the galaxy. Adventurous and high-spirited, this attitude would follow Anakin to the Jedi Temple, where he would find himself thrust into a situation he was ill-prepared for, and amongst people whom he frequently clashed with. Anakin, as the Masters predicted, was a tough initiate to train. Being brought into the Order at an age where he'd already formed attachments and had been influenced by elements outside of the Jedi Temple, caused Anakin to show independence and a penchant for rebellion early into his time as an initiate. At the age of 12, he was already well known at the temple for being unable to control his emotions, and he was often ridiculed by other younglings who felt they had a better understanding of what it meant to be a Jedi. Chancellor Palpatine would check on Anakin throughout his youth, but he openly displayed his interest in Anakin starting at the age of 12, when he took Anakin to a lower-level bar in Coruscant to expose him to some of the corruption that plagued the Republic. This was a pivotal moment for Anakin, as a boy who already felt out of place and unsure of himself in his adopted world, got the chance to see the cracks in that world for the first time, affecting his views of both the Jedi Order and the Republic. Here would be the first time Anakin would use his powers without regard for the teachings of the Jedi, as we can see when he influences the dice of Senator Calandis, a small beginning to the limits he would push as a Jedi. When the pair arrived back at the Chancellor's office, Palpatine tested the limits of Anakin's unstable feelings about being a Jedi, and offered him a place at his side should he choose to leave the Order. Though initially rebuffing his offer, upon his return to the Jedi Temple, he made the decision to step away from his training and leave the Order. Anakin, who had always longed to be free of his bonds and his sand-covered homeworld, likely felt that he was in a way a slave again. as he says to Obi-Wan that he didn't have much choice in the matter of deciding his fate when Qui-Gon offered to take him on as a Padawan. It was not only that, but his feeling that Obi-Wan didn't want to train him, and that the Order itself was unsure of his place amongst them, and all of these elements served to push Anakin to desire a chance at deciding his own destiny, wanting to travel the galaxy in search of who he really was. This would change when he saw the power of the Jedi's influence within the Republic, seeing for himself the ability they had to make a change in the galaxy. When the Jedi arrived to mediate a conflict between two groups of people on the planet Carnelian 4, known as the Closed and the Open, Anakin detested the system, as he said to Obi-Wan upon their arrival to the planet, but seeing the capabilities of it in action, and perhaps devising ways in which he could improve it by being a part of it, he ultimately chooses to continue his training. Though the end result was his continuation of his training, this moment shows us the beginning of what would be a lifetime of conflicting feelings regarding his life, the Jedi, and the Republic. And though he was unaware of it at the time, the seeds Palpatine had planted in his mind would never truly die, and would continue to grow over the years as they were watered by doubt, adversity, and despair. We next find Anakin in Attack of the Clones at the age of 19, where he's gone from that adventurous and willful child to an impatient and impulsive adolescent whose confidence in their abilities would bring him to a level of arrogance that was unbecoming of a Jedi. Anakin felt that he was more than capable as a Jedi and ready for the trials that awaited him. This attitude and unstable emotions will only grow as time goes on, and would be the cause of many unfortunate incidents that occur in Anakin's life. What brought more conflict into an already troubled life was his reunion with Padmé. The last thing a young man with an already tumultuous outlook on his own life needed was to become infatuated and fall in love with a woman he could not be with. This relationship would add yet another point of conflict within Anakin, splintering his focus on the Jedi Order to now be concerned with his feelings for Padmé, his conflicting views of the Republic and the Jedi, and the recent visions he was experiencing of his mother's demise. These feelings are only expanded after his mother's death, as an even stronger emotion in the form of guilt over his inability to prevent her death replaced the agony of his visions, and his marriage to Padmé intensifies their bond and the already burgeoning love he had for her, causing Anakin's focus to now be entirely split between his life as a Jedi and his secret life as the husband of Padmé. During Anakin's massacre of the Tuskens who kidnapped his mother, we also get to see the uncontrollable fury that is barely contained within Anakin, and this moment is an early harbinger of what's to come not so far into Anakin's future. Then, of course, comes the Clone Wars, which would enhance existing traits and emotions within Anakin, for better or for worse. Holding a personal vendetta against Count Dooku after the loss of his arm, and dedicated to preserving the Republic for both his friend Chancellor Palpatine and his Order, Anakin would become entrenched in a reality of warfare, one where he would find himself quite comfortable. Already used to thinking on the fly and solving problems, Anakin would show us his tactical mind right from the outset of the war, and would continue to show his resourcefulness and willingness to think outside the box during the many battles he found himself in. In line with his already immense capacity to love, Anakin would form a bond with the clones that served under him, recognizing them as people, and adopting the philosophy of no one gets left behind. And he would frequently risk his own life, and the lives of others, in his pursuit of preserving the lives of his friends and subordinates. There are countless events that occur during the Clone Wars TV series that show these traits in Anakin, and to list all of them here would be redundant. However, there are a few events that occur during these years that show us Anakin's conflicting views, and also the key moments that occur during the war that serve to push Anakin along the dark path he would inevitably take. One interesting event is the death of the Mortis gods that are inadvertently caused by Anakin, which are essentially a direct foreshadowing of the events that would occur in Anakin's life. The death of the daughter at the hands of the son can be seen as Palpatine's destruction of the Jedi Order, which was only caused by Anakin enabling the implementation of Order 66, and the death of the son by Anakin's hand can be seen as an allegory for the death he would bring to Palpatine, bringing balance to Mortis in the same way he would eventually bring balance to the Force, by destroying both representations of the light and the dark. Some of his willingness to give in to his anger is seen here on Mortis, but we get several other instances throughout the Clone Wars where he's pressed into a situation in which he sees no other alternative, or acts on his impulses, or disregard for tenets of the Jedi Order that hold him back, like when he interrogates Poggle the Lesser, Asajj Ventress, and Admiral Trench, or the numerous times we see his face contort into a mask of rage when he's put in stressful situations, or when he's concerned about the lives of his friends. Another aspect of Anakin we see quite frequently during this time is, again, his disparaging ideas on how the Republic and the Jedi conduct their business. An interesting moment that highlights these feelings is when he's speaking to Tarkin during a mission to the Citadel. Here, we see Anakin agreeing with Tarkin about the Jedi and Republic's lack of action in regards to ending the war, and we also get a moment of authority from Anakin that foreshadows both his relationship with Tarkin and the attitudes he would display upon his transition into Vader. This isn't the first instance of Anakin expressing this, however, as we saw before on Carnelian 4, but we also see it in Attack of the Clones when he's talking to Padmé, where he tells her that he thinks people should be forced into making decisions for the good of the people. And when she counters that it sounds like he's suggesting a dictatorship, he brushes it off as playful teasing. But these moments only reveal his true feelings about the complacent nature of the Jedi and the Republic, and their lack of action when it comes to both ending the war and upholding the values they claim to represent. We see this again when Ahsoka abandons the Order after a hasty and shoddy trial following the bombing of the Jedi Temple. Numerous times throughout this saga, Anakin expresses his disdain for the Council, believing in the honesty and integrity of his Padawan, in stark contrast to the Council's quick decision to condemn her, giving Anakin yet another reason to question the methods of the Jedi. All of these instances show us another thing about Anakin as well, and that's the fact that he's a man of action. And though at this time he has a reverence for the Force, his problem-solving is rooted in the here and now, and he's more concerned with the most effective way to tackle a situation. And if darkness needs to be indulged in order to bring about peace, he is more than willing to consider darker methods as an option. Anakin during his time as a Jedi is best described by Obi-Wan in the Revenge of the Sith novelization. "I think," Obi-Wan said carefully, "that abstractions like peace don't mean much to him. He's loyal to people, not to principles, and he expects loyalty in return. He will stop at nothing to save me, for example, because he thinks I would do the same for him." Though some of the things we've discussed about Anakin are indeed positive traits, the majority of them affect Anakin in a negative way, and much of the actions he takes as a result weigh heavy on his conscience and only serve to edge him further toward the dark side. Up until the Revenge of the Sith, Anakin was performing a delicate balancing act between light and dark, and he succeeded in straying towards the light more often than not. But the beginning of the end for Anakin's adherence to the light comes when Anakin cuts off the head of Count Dooku. In the Revenge of the Sith novelization, we're given a window into Anakin's mind during this moment, where he thinks to himself, "Who am I? Was he the slave boy on a desert planet, valued for his astonishing gift with machines? Was he the legendary pod racer, the only human to survive that deadly sport? Was he the unruly, high-spirited, trouble-prone student of a great Jedi Master? The star pilot? The hero? The lover? The Jedi? Could he be all these things? Could he be any of them and still have done what he has done?" He was already discovering the answer. Within Anakin's mind, we have found a man whose myriad of conflicting thoughts coalesce to bring to a head the crisis of identity he had been experiencing for years now. These feelings are only further intensified by the revelation of Padmé's pregnancy, and the visions he begins having of her imminent death thereafter. Distraught and searching for answers, Anakin goes to Master Yoda for guidance, hoping the wisest Jedi in the Order will be able to help with this issue. Here, after Yoda tells him to let go of his fear and rejoice at whomever he might lose becoming one with the Force, Anakin has an internal monologue decrying the pious rhetoric of Yoda, feeling that Yoda couldn't possibly understand his feelings after being so entrenched in the Jedi Order for over 8 centuries. To add further fuel to an already growing fire is his induction into the Council at the behest of Palpatine, and his place amongst the Council as only a representative of the Chancellor and not a master. Anakin had already felt for so long that he was far beyond the capabilities of most Jedi, and it was the fear they had of his power that kept them from promoting him further. To further exasperate those feelings, he had always felt that he was an outcast in the Jedi Order, and that Yoda himself was against Anakin being in the Order. These notions also contributed to his relationship with Palpatine, whom he felt was the only one he could speak to freely, someone who wasn't compromised by the limits of the Jedi, including his supposed best friend, Obi-Wan. It's no surprise, then, that when the Chancellor professed his concern to Anakin that the Jedi were moving against him, Anakin's feelings were split even further, between the man he regarded as a father figure, a friend, and someone who was guiding the Republic in the direction that it needed to go, and an order that belittled him and was afraid of him, who were constantly taking actions in the galaxy that he disapproved of. Not to mention that the now revealed Sith Lord was more than willing to help Anakin in not only embracing his marriage, but saving his wife from a death he felt was certain. And now, we've arrived at the most crucial crossroad in Anakin Skywalker's life. And what has to be understood about the choice Anakin makes at this crossroad is the key trait he holds that has been present in everything we have discussed about him so far, and that's his infinite capacity to love. In the case of Anakin, the greatest love he holds is for those around him, and the lengths he would go to protect and ensure the prosperity of that love is the eye of the storm of emotions that is constantly swirling within him. Take this quote from Obi-Wan from the Revenge of the Sith novelization as an example. For Anakin, there is nothing more important than friendship. He is the most loyal man I have ever met. Loyal beyond reason, in fact. Despite all I have tried to teach him about the sacrifices that are the heart of being a Jedi, he will never, I think, truly understand. Anakin is a person who is able to feel compassion for nearly any being in the galaxy, and his care for his friends, family, and subordinates knows no bounds. As a result, loyalty comes easy to him, and the problem that exists within Anakin at this moment is the incredibly difficult decision he needs to make, deciding who above all that he holds dear is most deserving of his loyalty. Jedi, Republic, wife, master, friend, father. 6 different avenues, linked in various ways, are all running through his head in the moment before he ultimately decides to stand with Palpatine. The deciding factor in this conclusion is fear. The primary catalyst for the degeneration of Anakin's love is the fear he has of losing his wife, and the lengths he would go to prevent her death from happening. He quickly realizes that those lengths are limitless, and with one stroke of his lightsaber, he betrays his friends, his order, and the government he served, in order to save his wife by using the power of a man he had come to love almost as equally as his wife. This betrayal of so many people, and the heart-wrenching events that follow after this moment, seem quite quick, rash, and full of unabashed hatred that they almost seem unreal. But that's the thing about hatred. Hatred, in one way or another, always comes from a place of love. Now, whether that love is misguided is a different story, but intense hatred is always matched by a love for something or someone that's just as intense, whether that be yourself, your family, your people, or something else entirely. And at this point in his life, Anakin, now Vader, has come to the conclusion that everything and anything that stands in the way of his love for his wife is more than deserving of every ounce of hatred he can muster. It's this love that causes Anakin to betray others he loved in favor of a love that had touched him in a way the others could not. This betrayal immediately had its effects on Anakin, as this was no easy choice, and he was already feeling the emotional ramifications of his decision when he landed on Mustafar. After his duel with Obi-Wan, his injuries, and his realization of Padmé's death, which he believed he caused, the unlimited love that Anakin held in his heart is left burnt and broken even further than his mangled body. Where once he had loved so dearly, he now holds hate just as strong, a hate that would cause him to be unrelenting and remorseless in his service to the only person left in the galaxy whom he cared for, and who cared for him, his new master, Darth Sidious. The old adage of the Jedi had become entirely true for Anakin, as his pain had led to fear of losing those he loved, a fear that enticed him into succumbing to the false promises of the dark side, his anger to killing his friends, his family, and the innocent, and his hate has turned him against everyone and everything he once held dear, including himself. Darth Sidious would have you believe that hate leads you to strength, and certainly in his case, it did. But while Anakin's hate had given him greater power through the dark side, his power is superseded by the unending suffering he now has to endure. Constant suffering punctuates every step he takes, and Anakin has become the living aspect of suffering, physically and mentally. And this unending torment transforms his unlimited capacity for compassion into a bottomless well of hatred. We get a visualization of the hatred we see roiling within every fiber of his being in the Darth Vader comics when he's meditating, where he looks like a being of raw and pure malicious energy, an entity entirely encased in the dark side. With his newfound powers and outlook on life, Anakin was no longer concerned with saving lives. Instead, he pledged all his energy to quite the opposite: the hero who had dedicated himself to being the protector of nearly every being in the galaxy, was now a rampaging monster who would kill anyone in his path. Jedi, civilians, allies, no one was safe from the wrath of Vader, and everyone he came into contact with was only a word or a slight misstep away from imminent death. Anakin, as far as Vader was concerned, no longer existed, being usurped and replaced by Darth Vader. Vader had lost everything, except his only remaining so-called friend in the galaxy, his master, Darth Sidious. Vader, who had once been so powerful he was able to bend deities to his will, had now been reduced to a shell of his former self. And though he expressed to Padmé that he could overthrow the Emperor, and he still desired to do so even after his injuries, he could no longer match the raw power of his master. Thus, with no other options, Vader would now dedicate himself solely to upholding and enhancing the power he had cultivated under his master's tutelage, and would embark on a quest to bring the constant pain that he felt at all times to hundreds of thousands of sentient lives across the galaxy. Vader was utterly without mercy, especially when it came to dealing with the failures of his subordinates. And though you can usually find a few redeeming qualities in a villain, or moments of humanity, in Vader, they are entirely absent. The utter brutality of Darth Vader is terrifying to behold, as we see him threatening people with almost every word he speaks, and when he's not speaking of terror, he's acting upon it, ending the lives of thousands of innocent individuals to catch a single Jedi, or tormenting and murdering his own allies for small infractions in the name of both order and his own personal desire to kill. What makes this all the more terrifying is the fact that Vader can act as a veritable force of nature with near impunity, and there is little hope for anyone who crosses the path of a man whose desire to kill is unrestrained and without consequence. Because of the view he holds that nearly anyone he comes across is simply a victim waiting to be cut down, Vader's relationship with people as a result was virtually non-existent. When interacting with his allies, such as Tarkin, Thrawn, or his master, he only interacted with them so far as they were either taking orders from him, giving him orders, or providing something for him. With Tarkin, he had a certain amount of respect for his capabilities and his history as a hunter and military commander. And with Thrawn, he begrudgingly worked with him during their mission to Batuu and acknowledged his usefulness and tactical mind. But outside of certain amounts of respect he had for these men and few others, Vader lived a life of virtual solitude. It's interesting to note that now that Anakin has transitioned into Darth Vader, his reverence for the Force increased almost to that of zealotry, and we see him speak numerous times about the power of the Force being above all else. Another element of Vader that had been turned on its head after his rebirth are the heroic endeavors he used to plan on the fly, as now he rarely needs a plan at all, hastily constructed or otherwise, preferring to simply use brute force in most situations. He would have a few moments where he would make plans ahead of time, such as when he tried to overcome his master's plot to replace him by forming an army of battle droids. But more often than not, he would simply force his way through a situation, and this use of force frequently backfired on Vader, and we see him suffer numerous times throughout the franchise as a result of this brash behavior. With all of the things we've discussed in mind, we can essentially break down Vader's philosophy to following the will of the Force, using the dark side to further one's power, is the path that is true. The way the Empire has ordered the galaxy is correct, and his existence now only serves one purpose: to inflict pain and suffering upon others. As I said before, the pain he doles out to everyone in his path is a direct expression of the pain he himself is constantly suffering. But due to the machinations of his master, Vader's pain was hardly concrete, and he would be tested often by his master to ensure his loyalty, teach him lessons, and to prove whether or not Vader was still worthy of being his apprentice. We see this happen numerous times throughout the Vader comics, notably when Palpatine tortures Vader with Force lightning after his cybernetics are attached, when Palpatine conspires with Dr. Silo to create half-Force sensitive monstrosities to potentially replace Vader, and when he abandons Vader on Mustafar with only one arm, and commanding him not to use the Force in order to save himself from certain doom. I mentioned before that Palpatine was, in a way, Vader's only friend left in the entire galaxy, but that's a tenuous notion at best, as Vader, during these years, would already be working at various points to undermine his master and succeed him as Emperor. But these moments of pain and torture coming directly from his master only exasperated these feelings, and two events in particular broke any ounce of loyalty Vader had to his master outside what was necessary to keep him from killing him. The first was the revelation that Vader wasn't the one who killed Padmé, and that she actually died during childbirth. Though Vader could only act on his intensified hatred for his master in part, this pushed him over the edge in seeking to undermine his master by taking advantage of the second event he discovered in tandem with this one, that he had a son, and that he could turn his son to the dark side in order to take down the Emperor. From this moment on, Vader's focus was now pointed solely at finding his son and using him to overthrow the Emperor. Throughout these years, he would still enforce the rule of the Empire, but all of his actions were now directed towards finding Luke. It should be noted that several times throughout Vader's life, he did have chances at redeeming himself and turning away from the horrendous actions he was taking, like when Ahsoka confronted him on Malachor, or when Luke tries to save him in Return of the Jedi. But all these efforts would be for naught, and only in the end would Vader turn away from the darkness he had succumbed to. And at this end, we know that his efforts to convert Luke didn't succeed, and that his son would actually be the catalyst for his redemption and his fulfillment of the prophecy of the Chosen One. With a desire to save his son overcoming him, and to bring about the downfall of his master, Vader brings an end to both himself and Sidious, stamping out the threat of the dark side and bringing balance to the Force, just as he did on Mortis all those years ago. Now, before we sum up Vader, I want to talk a bit about the balancing of the Force, the dark side, and the prophecy of the Chosen One. The thing about the dark side is that it isn't inherently evil, as many characters say throughout the Star Wars franchise, Jedi and Sith both. The dark side is as much a part of the natural order as the light side is. Thus, evil does not come from the dark side. Rather, it is evil people who use the dark side to enhance their malicious intent. The use of Force lightning to torture somebody is evil. The use of the dark side to crush innocent civilians under a torrent of water and stone is evil. But the dark side itself is, again, only a part of the natural order. And that's why the Force comes into balance by removing the elements that sought to use both the light and the dark as they weren't intended to be used. The moral posturing and hubris of the Jedi were as much an offense to the will of the Force as the power-hungry, malicious, and selfish Sith were. Therefore, Anakin, being the Chosen One, was meant to do exactly as the prophecy foretold, bring balance to the Force, and both the Jedi and Sith, believing that this prophecy was meant to balance the Force according to their viewpoint, is entirely wrong. With his enablement of the end of the Jedi Order and the death of Darth Sidious, Anakin ultimately fulfills the prophecy of the Chosen One and brings balance to the Force. Though this may be true, and though this may be the way events were destined to unfold for Anakin, in the end, who was Anakin Skywalker? He was a compassionate and energetic young man who longed to free himself from the bonds of slavery he and his mother had been subjected to, who was given the opportunity to take a path that brought him this freedom, but one which he was wholly unprepared to take. His years as an initiate at the Jedi Temple were marked by an ego and willful attitude that often put him at odds with the other members of his order, and would leave him feeling like an outcast whose place was uncertain in the life he had chosen to take. During this time, he would develop a healthy criticism of his order and his government, finding the cracks and faults in a system that was blissfully ignorant of the suffering that plagued the galaxy and the threat that had developed in the shadows. From these shadows would emerge a man whose entire being was concentrated solely on one goal, ultimate power. And in this quest for ultimate power, Anakin would fall prey to the devious machinations of this entity of pure, unabashed evil. By the time he had reached adolescence, he had grown rebellious, prideful, and arrogant. And though one of his greatest virtues was his infinite capacity for love, this would be both frowned upon and exploited by those around him. And the choices he made that came from this love would ultimately render him vulnerable to further manipulation by that ever-present shadow that had followed him since his childhood. Defeated by his own love and warped into an entity of pure hatred, Darth Vader would become one of the most brutal and remorseless criminals the galaxy had ever seen, seeking to extend the pain emanating from his own being into every soul he encountered, no longer holding any regard for the sentient life he had once placed above all else. Anakin Skywalker, as Darth Vader, brought death and suffering to the galaxy at large, by not only propping up the brutal authoritarian regime of his master, but by his own hand. And untold millions of individuals throughout the galaxy suffered as a direct or indirect result of his actions. He may have been destined to fill this role and to take the actions he took, but as many have commented throughout the Star Wars universe, the future is always in motion. And though Anakin had little choice or help in the matter of his manipulation into a monstrosity. Vader certainly had the capacity to recognize the crimes he was committing on a mass scale, and could have put an end to his murderous intent if he had willed it. Destined to do so, or not, Anakin Skywalker committed an astronomical amount of crimes in the name of his own selfish ambitions, and his disregard for sentient life after his transition to Vader, and willingness to sacrifice everything and anything to achieve his goals, make him a villain most worthy of drowning in a sea of evil. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Analyzing Evil, and I hope you've enjoyed. What are your thoughts on Anakin and Vader? Did I miss anything? Let me know down below, and leave a suggestion for a villain you'd like to see featured while you're at it. If you liked this video and want to see more like it appearing in your feed, click the subscribe button to keep up on the latest episodes, and feel free to leave a like while you're at it. Thank you once again to all of my existing subscribers for your incredible support. If you'd like to support the channel further, consider signing up as a patron over on Patreon. You can find a link to Patreon down in the description. Thank you to everyone who's signed up so far, and a most vile thank you to those whose names you're seeing on screen now. Join the channel's Discord server to interact with myself and others in the community, and follow me on the social media platforms listed in the description for occasional updates on the channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon.